Hegel is crazy. The Hegelian slash Lacanian slash Marxist philosopher Slavoj Zizek wrote a book about the famous idealist philosopher Hegel's aesthetics called Less Than Nothing. He gets into Hegel and his precursor Fichte's thoughts on epistemology, the subject, ontology, and consciousness. Zizek criticizes both of them, Fichte more so, while still giving merit to the latter's good points. Fichte. He thinks that it's a fatal flaw for other philosophers to dismiss Fichte's thoughts on the subject in particular as the worst on the subject, as particular as a subject, as the worst being the worst of idealism. The common view at this time in German and European or continental idealists, the common view is that Hegel's supposed system of absolute knowledge is a descent into madness because attaining this seems impossible, especially from the perspective of idealism. How can you attain absolute knowledge from an idealist perspective if you're only basically trusting your own mind because the mind is all that exists in the world? How can you trust that to use it to attain absolute knowledge? So this is a descent into madness. However, philosophers acknowledge that Hegel's view or Hegel's work has a lot of valuable information about history, culture, politics, and aesthetics. Fichte is even crazier than Hegel. Enlightenment philosophers, like such as Bertrand Russell, says in his book *The History of Western Philosophy* that Hegel represents nothing but madness, not even a descent into madness, like Fichte, but nothing but madness. The latter was a solipsist, Hegel. To oversimplify, this means that the self is all that exists, nothing else exists. Even Lacan, who was also an idealist, and remember, Hegel was a Lacanian, so he signed on to a lot of his views, but not all of them, of course. Even Lacan, who was also an idealist, uh, like Hegel, of course, and many other idealists. So Lacan smashed fictive solipsism in terms of ontology and consciousness. He said that this solipsism of Hegel is madness advocated by no wise man. It's madness. Lacan said that Fichte's solipsism is madness advocated by no man, advocated by no wise man. Even Fichte's fan sees a large form of modern subjectivity in his work. Clearly, Fichteans must do some kind of fucking philosophical gymnastics to justify his Hegelian system of absolute knowledge. You can't gain absolute knowledge from the subjectivity of Fichte's solipsism. You can't gain absolute knowledge from a subjective perspective. Zizek totally concurs with this takedown of Fichte's solipsism. And remember, he's a Hegelian himself. He obviously doesn't sign on to all of Hegel's positions, though, including Hegel's supposed system of absolute knowledge. He points out that Fichte's thought begins with the self positing of itself, then jumps right from there to the not self. The self cannot posit the not self. That's what Kant would call a synthetic a priori claim, meaning that it's assumed to be inherently true. It doesn't need to be justified. That the self leads to the non self, that doesn't make any sense. Also, going straight from the self to the not self means that Fichte skips any logical or philosophical connection or transition between the self and the not self. These are pure abstract rationalizations, supported by ridiculous arguments and references to math in his writing. They also endlessly oscillate between weird jumps and poor common sense. So, Zizek commends Fichte's position on the subject. However, in spite of him being a Hegelian himself, Zizek accepts the other philosophers' common criticisms of both Fichte and Hegel. One who sees him as mad is Lacan, and Zizek is Lacanian too. Hegel's supposed system of absolute knowledge is a descent into madness. It's impossible to gain absolute knowledge from idealism and subjectivity. Absolute knowledge would clearly be objective rather than subjective. Remember that Fichte is a precursor to Hegel. Hegel uses Fichte's solipsism to justify his system of absolute knowledge. If you think that the self is all that exists, and you're subjectively relying on synthetic a priori claims and flawed logic to get there, this is fucking insane, man. Fichte's solipsism idealism on this subject is a bad argument. That's it. Hegel's system of absolute knowledge relies on philosophically bankrupt arguments. Idealism does not prove absolute knowledge. Hegel is crazy. Fichte is even crazier.